question is, do you agree that Scotland should be an independent country?
For me, the principle that we work best when we work together.
Well, they didn't.
Very serious. The referendum. It seems to me that they're not dealing with the issues.
Hi, the Scottish Independence Podcast is your chance to hear some different views on what the independence referendum means for Scotland. Hello, this is Scottish Independence Podcast number 18, and this time I spoke to Ruaridh and Keith Waddell, who are Scottish aid workers that are working over in Zambia. We had a conversation about quite a few things. First, we talked about the work that they're doing over there. We also talked about the role of Scots in the empire. It's a little bit different from what you might have been told, and I think that makes for a very interesting part. And we also talked about some of the independence movements that we don't really hear that often about. You often hear about things going on in Catalonia or Quebec, but there's lots of other ones around the world that you might not have heard so much about. So we had a little chat about one of those in particular. We also talk about the future prospect for international aid from Scotland. What could we do differently? How could we do things better? How things need to change. So we'll go straight to the conversation. I'll have a wee word with you before we finish. Hello, Ruaridh and Keith Waddell. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you, Michael. Very well.
No bad.
And how's Zambia treating you?
We're in the middle of the rainy season at the moment, so we're actually in the southwest corner of Zambia in a district called Sesheke district, right on the banks of the Zambezi River. Mm-hmm. So this is a time when the river is rising greatly behind us, and we had a good rainstorm this afternoon. Sort of breaks the heat and the monotony of constant days of sunshine from April through to November.
Yeah, I've been in Korea and Nepal during the monsoon season, so I think you probably laugh at Scottish people complaining about the rain at these moments. I don't know.
Yeah. I've hammered a bar into the bank of the river, and that marks the highest level that the water has reached before it begins to lap at the back door. And I'm looking a bit askance at the water rising at the moment, but hopefully it'll be all right.
So would you like to explain what you're doing in Zambia at the moment?
Well, I run an agricultural project which has extension services to our local community, mainly with livestock, with cattle. We have a livestock development program whereby we help train farmers in animal husbandry and vaccinations of cattle for all the dodgy diseases that I won't even mention lest I be banned from ever returning to Scotland. And we also provide education. We also have a demonstration farm which provides profit, which allows us to do these programs and also to support orphans and vulnerable children's program. We feed around 300 orphans every day. We have about 800 that we educate through from preschool right up to university. We have about 20 young people in university studying everything from medicine to metallurgy. So I have quite a varied role. I let Keith tell you what he does.
I'm a teacher to trade. This year I'm teaching grade 8 maths and science and grade 12 history. Other than that, I have a reduced timetable so that I can undertake development work. We're building a high school on an ongoing basis. We've now got 3 classroom blocks, and the government has changed the system, so we're going away from what they call a high school to a secondary school. So we'll have children from grade 8 to grade 12 instead of children from grade 10 to grade 12.
Which is year 3 to 6, basically.
The second part of secondary school.
Yeah.
How long have you been there?
We've been in Africa since 1990.
We were 3 years in Zimbabwe, working in Ruaridh, and then after teaching, and my wife was a nurse, and then we came to Zambia and continued teaching and nursing in the central province, and after that we moved here in 2004. to Western Province, and we've been working here since then.
I actually went backwards and forwards to school and university in Scotland, and I finished my law degree in the University of Strathclyde in 2005, and I came out here on a gap year to help my dad run a food relief program that we had running. We had a terrible drought in 2004, 2005. There was just no rain, so there was large areas of hunger and malnutrition. So we had a food relief program in conjunction with USAID, and I ran that for 6 months, and ended up never going back to training contracts, etc., with law firms. So I've been here since 2005.
Because, just before we get into the bones of it, the reason that we're having this conversation, apart from just the chat, is the idea of aid work and Scotland's role in the world around aid work. And I was involved with it a little bit myself when I went to Nepal for a while, and I can totally agree with what you're saying there, because I didn't want to come back either, but I had to. But if I ever disappear, I'm going there. You'll find me there somewhere, or you won't find me there. That being the point.
Well, but, you can come via Zambia and have a visit and see the falls.
So before we get into the sort of heavier part of it, I just wanted to ask a question about, because when I went to Nepal, or I also lived in Korea, but that's not a country with problems like other places, but the same kind of thing happens. You say, where are you? They say, where are you from? And you say, Scotland. And they say, oh, England. No, is your kind of standard response to that? I wondered, do you get that there? Or is there any kind of perception of Scotland as a country, or do they do they believe it's part of England, or
Zambia and Malawi have very strong ties with Scotland, going back to David Livingstone's times, and people are actually truly surprised when you say that. Obviously, we consider Scotland to be a nation in its own right. And people are very surprised when you say, well, actually, we're part of a United Kingdom. To try and explain that Scotland actually is not an independent country is greeted with bafflement on the part of most Zambians, who've just taken it as bona fide that we are indeed an independent nation.
I generally greet it with bafflement, but sorry.
I was just saying, again, we meet Zambians at the Commonwealth Games and so on, and they assume that Scotland is a self-governing nation like most of the other countries in the world.
I guess because they see Scotland attempting to play football and rugby every now and again, that they assume that we are our own independent country. So it's a little bit different. And as I say, because of David Livingstone, who's come before us, and many other, I suppose, missionaries, and there was definitely, especially in Zambia and Malawi, pre-independence during the colonial era, there was a lot of Scots who came out to work on the mines, who were involved in the development of infrastructure like the railways. So there's always been a very big Scottish presence, and I think that goes across the empire, not just within Africa, but also you look at India. Even my wife is Australian, and you go to Australia and you go and climb the Harbour Bridge in Sydney, and you see the number of Scots who built the Harbour Bridge. So I actually think as Scots we've been a lot more international than the rest of our
and the United Kingdom. Yeah, another important role that Scotland has played really is in education, and the first president of Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda, he comes from a Scottish mission education background, as did Julius Nyerere, and we're maybe not mentioning him in the same group, but Hastings Banda as well had a Scottish educational background.
Sorry, just can you explain who he was? Was
Hastings Banda was the first president of Malawi, and Nyerere was the first president of Tanzania.
Good guy.
Yes.
Nyerere was, my dad is actually quite a fan of him, so he
Yeah, well, I'm a child of the 60s and 70s, and Ruaridh also studied. He was at Edinburgh University, so I have a strong affection for him. And yes, he was one of the African socialists, and people say economically he screwed up. But if you take a look at the basic foundations in health and education and agriculture, what he did was of lasting importance.
Just there was something you brought up earlier there that I'd like to come back to, the idea of empire and Scots in the empire, because it's a very interesting area, you know. And we're often told that a good reason for staying in the Union is that we were involved in empire building, and equally people think a good reason for getting out of the Union is that we were dragged into this whole villainous empire business. And I just wondered what you made of that, staying out there.
You know, it's a difficult one, Michael, because what we on a daily basis try to do is not to be associated with colonialism or a colonial influence. And I think there has to be, I don't necessarily know if this answers your question, but I think there has to be a clear delineation between what is happening now as to what happened pre-independence in these states. Anyone who says that Scotland's contribution to the empire, I certainly would not consider that to be a reason for us to remain as part of the United Kingdom. I think empire building and colonialism has resulted in the deficiencies that we find in Africa today, and I suppose in most of the empire, you could say a similar thing.
Yeah, many of the Scots, educators and others who were involved in the mission work, they were actually, from an English point or an establishment point of view, subversive.
Yeah.
They actually supported the people in their struggle to free themselves from imperial rule and gain independence. And also coming, I think, from a small country that had been taken over by a larger entity, gave many Scots a sympathy with the indigenous people that perhaps the ruling class didn't have.
Something I mentioned on a previous podcast was the idea of the colonial bureaucracies that were left behind, about how those bureaucracies were designed in a way to funnel money and power back to a centralised authority, which happened to be London or Paris at the time. But when freedom arrived for these countries, the bureaucracy was still in place that funneled money, so it was easy meat for certain dictators. I don't know, like you two have got more experience in the field than me, but is that a fair comment?
Yeah, no, I think so. We actually listened to that podcast and actually really identified with that. And I think you're spot on, to be honest. And you see that in the government systems that are presented today, although they are actually, certainly in the last 10 years, governance in Africa has come a long way. Well, I should say maybe governance in Zambia. I think Africa is spreading it too widely. But I definitely agree with what you're saying. I think there's a lot of merit. I think you can see that in Zimbabwe, is that despite you having the years of the Smith regime after the unilateral declaration of independence, you still have a system that is set up to contribute to an ultimate executive, whether that be a colonial ruler in London or Paris, Madrid, wherever you want to be, or your own homegrown dictator. And I think that's one of the areas in which in the last 10 years there's been an attempt to decentralize local authority, certainly in Zambia, to try and prevent that, to make sure that people living within a region are contributing to a smaller region, to a district or provincial level.
But saying that, there's also definite neo-colonialism. If you go back to independence, the African countries, were given really political independence. And this, I think, is also pertinent to the Scottish debate. Political independence